Well, I made it. Absolutely fantastic. I was a bit stressing out about it all, to be honest, because of the travelling, but it was really, really easy. And I remember yesterday when I was coming over from the airport, I had all my details with me, handed it over, but the person there didn't even look at my details. But he asked me why I was here. And I was like, well, I've come to Prague to speak at a congress. And he looked at my passport, he went, what are you? So that's what I've had to deal with already. So, hello everybody, my name's Nathan Coyle. It is genuinely lovely to be here today. I run a not-for-profit organisation in the UK. I know it's a bit egotistical to have my details right there, but obviously if that's there, I can more just talk about the issue. Now, first of all, I do have to apologise and wish you best of luck for trying to understand my accent, because even in the UK, I am from a part called the Black Country, and we speak like this, so we have really struggled. So I'm going to speak the Queen's English today and try my very, very best. But if you don't understand me, please do say. You know, I don't know what it is about open data. I don't know why we talk about it like it's quantum physics. And obviously everyone here knows what open data is, but for the people at home, for you don't know, open data is the idea that some information should be shared, freely available, and replicated free of charge. In my mind, it's a tool for collaboration. I think it's a powerful statement that, say, a local government can release data on, say, housing or water or whatever, and then an activist can come along and do something about it or hold their feet to the fire. So that's where I will be talking about a lot today, is from a kind of an activist point of view, especially working with a lot of governments and outreach when it comes to the third sector. So I'll be feeding back a lot of that kind of qualitative data, mostly about experiences and what these kind of people are saying and thinking about. So in regards to open data, from my experience, a lot of these groups feel forgotten, and they feel kind of pushed out of a lot of kind of data narratives and data agendas. And I'm not talking about the big NGOs, the tech-savvy ones that we have all around our countries. I'm talking about the really small neighbourhood development organisation who are making a change to people's lives. Those really, really important organisations in our neighbourhood and community. Is this going to work? Nothing's happening. Big green button pressed. Nothing happens, my friend. Oh, is another green button? Yes. There we go. This is why I should have had a little bit of a sound check. So open data is a really powerful tool for these groups to improve their capacity. The problem is they just don't know about it. And why should they be if it's obvious from a lot of governments that they're not the target audience? Now, I challenge you to go to any open data portal in the world. If you look at its design and language, you'll be forgiven. They are actually corporate entities in their own right. Honestly, think about it. Think about the place where you get your data from in the past. You know, how corporate do you think they are? And this is from an activist point of view. But I mean, that's okay. It's the backbone of a lot of science and academia projects. Open data is readily used from health, academia, and the corporate sector, which is important to a lot of civic systems. These areas supply jobs, research, infrastructure that is incredibly important to our towns and cities. But I just believe we can do more to help get data used within these grassroots organisations in our community. From my experience, there is no need for the redesign just yet, just a more holistic approach through community development and campaigns. And I will talk a little bit more about that later. But before we really delve in, I want us to think about what it's like for the majority. Something that has something to do with people pushing the agenda. In regards to digitalisation or smart cities, for example, usually it's some sort of external agency commissioned by central government to go into local government institutions and help them to set up their own agenda. So I'm not going to name names, but the one in the UK is like this super, super corporate, sleek machine. And unfortunately, open data has got caught up in that image. But does it go deeper? And yes, I think it does. Obviously, I can only give you a perspective from a British person, but I know there were definitely similarities from my work speaking with other activists and professionals across Europe. Here we go. Sometimes it's a social culture thing, a notion of trust. I can't speak for here in the beautiful city of Prague, but in the UK, you'll find it quite common to see grassroots NGOs to have a distrust for government, local government especially. A lot of organisations have a notion that they see a lot of projects happen, usually under some branding, but as soon as funding runs out, it is gone. There is no more talk about it, it just disappears, even if the notion of internal policy that was actually influenced and everything was all in the best intentions, but it's not more talked about. Dialogue stops, and that narrative really resonates with NGOs in the UK. But is it more deep-seated than that? Is it something that is ingrained in us culturally to distrust decision makers? And does it spill out into grassroots organisations with our poor civil servants? Can someone get me a glass of water, please? Before I was going to go on. Now, I apologise, I'm going to get a little bit political. I didn't really want to, but I kind of have to talk about the narrative. People are sick of experts, said a once famous British politician in the UK. And he's right, but not in the way that he'd probably want me to believe. When the then Secretary of State for Justice, Michael Gove, said that during the UK's turbulent Brexit campaign, and I promise you it was bloody turbulent, thank you very, very much. That's better. It was very, very turbulent, and I remember all hell breaking loose in every part of the UK. You couldn't even go to the pub without having an argument, but that is pretty much ingrained in us. It actually resonated more with local people. It was basically tapping into the growing intellectualism that resonates in our streets. You could argue a lot of political campaigns across Europe in the last few years are based on that, unfortunately. And I'm saying that from a German point of view because I used to live in Germany. And I saw a lot of similarities around the same time. But okay, what has that got to do with open data? Well, it's quite obvious if you're turning up the volume on an already strained relationship of trust, especially if that local authority is genuinely just trying to get things done, it makes a hard job even harder. And that does have a knock-on effect. And open data is already bloody hard to communicate to third sector anyway, but it can be described sometimes as the quintessential hard-to-reach policy. Can a lot of technological outlooks be partnered with political rhetoric for its detriment? Yes, massively so. And again, I'm only talking from a UK perspective. Not too long ago, a major political leader from a political party in the UK was talking about the importance of digital democracy, and he was absolutely slated in the press. I distinctly remember and being incredibly dismayed, I might add, watching a lunchtime political programme where the presenter, not a panellist, said he was talking nonsense. Now, obviously, we all agree that digital democracy is a good thing, and I genuinely think it's such a shame in the UK that the first time people heard about it was in this news programme, and it already had that negative connotation. Now, with all that in mind, spare a thought for the poor government worker having a hard time trying to explain this stuff to community groups. And again, this is in the UK. Okay. Imagine, if you will, that you're a local volunteer, say in the UK, with a community-based organisation, and you're in a workshop. And a local public servant comes into the room and tells you about upcoming strategy and starts talking about IoT, blockchain, smart cities. Pick any digitalisation term that you like, and I can promise you it will go down like a lead balloon, and that means very, very badly. Third sector will and has in the past disengaged, and then it comes time and money due to further outreach projects, for example, to fix it. And now, while this is rare, there is also a culture of some government staff, mostly senior, are afraid to ask questions because they feel they have to come across the expert in their field. I've seen this firsthand working with a lot of local government across the UK, that when they get to a certain role, they don't feel that they can communicate that sometimes they might need more help or training or even ask questions on that issue. And also that can have, again, this negative connotation that, the information is getting made muddy. If all it takes in the first instance is to word our language clearly, knowing our room, and forgetting the notion that we have to impress everybody as professionals with our lingo, then, in hindsight, it is surely worth doing. So if that's you, stop. If you notice it with a colleague, try to support them without embarrassing them. There is an old saying, know your market. And it's fair to say there's a lot of room for market research in regards to open data and digital policy outreach. What I'm going to do a bit later is present some of the qualitative data from a series of events. There might be some kind of pull-out quotes you can have there, but it's mostly around data narrative. This is from a bunch of work I've done across 14 nations across the globe. A lot of the time that's with central policymakers, and I'm literally, a bit later, going to talk you through some of the feedback, and we can see if there are any kind of social themes that we can discover. But briefly, what gets grassroots organisations interested in open data? What would bring them to the table in regards to my experience? These are, and I know I'm stating the obvious, but that's just how it is. Maybe not stating the obvious is how and why the third sector disconnects, and I just want to count just a bit more kind of feedback on this. So this is usually from working in the West Midlands, where I'm from. I work with a lot of local government across the region. And what they're trying to do now is trying to help communities to be a bit more resilient. So they want to get them using data for those kind of purposes. But they don't know the data's there. So we have these kind of issues when it comes to trying to get third sector people to workshops and events or that kind of stuff. If you start banging on about open data, that doesn't resonate with them. It doesn't mean anything to them. So you have to kind of find the narrative to get them there, and then they learn about open data and they learn about it and think it's a great thing and start using it. So funding as a basis of evidence. So for funding applications, et cetera, from a hyper-local point of view, I'll give you a very, very quick example. There's a council in the West Midlands called Sandwell Council, and there is a massive issue with trash and rubbish everywhere. So they're trying to get more tendering from local organisations and community groups who can do more about it, but they want them to use that data in order to have it as their basis of evidence to outline the need for it. Reporting, mapping social trends, blogging and journalistic, like social action stuff, and holding decision makers accountable. Again, before, when we're talking about the trust notion, so a lot of these local governments I'm talking about just there are from super marginalised areas in the UK, where, again, they had this kind of thing where local government comes in, tells them all sorts of stuff, and kind of disappears. So they have that kind of notion that there's a lot of hard work and a lot of fixing to be had. And now that's more important than ever, considering what has happened over the last few years. There is less money around for these organisations now. These organisations depend on funding from local government. So going to evidence their need for commissioning is going to be really important. Can that live there like that? It's precarious, but it's better. For a community to be resilient, they need these organisations. So if you're in a position to help or educate them, now is the time to do that. If you have a grassroots community organisation where you live, go and talk to them. So, going back in time, this is a bit of self-reflection now. Something like 7 years ago, I used to sit on various smart city commissioning groups in the UK. I was a bit young, and I was challenged by a lot of the language that was being bounced around the table. And I found it really, really intimidating, to the point where I was really starting to struggle. I was struggling to engage, and I was thinking to myself, I was beating myself up that maybe I should know this stuff. And I'm fairly well educated, so it wasn't really me. And I like to say that a lot of these people on these groups were usually from universities, innovation hubs, especially Birmingham, which is the second city. We had all these kind of people coming to the table, and there's a lot of loud voices in the room, and I'm sure there are a lot of facilitators in this room who go out and do workshops and events, and you always have those people in the room who have the louder voice, and you have to manage them in order to make sure everybody else can have a say. So I went away and I studied, and I got to the stage where I felt more confident, and I started to engage more, learn about the people around the table, but then I just found out that they were probably just as clueless as me, and it just started turning into a bit of a filibustering competition, like a really middle-class and middle-aged rap battle, and it wasn't good, and nothing was getting done, and it was just these people where, in their minds, they were the most powerful people in the cities, talking about things that wasn't really important. So that's when I received a small grant from the UK government to do some scoping work around government officer knowledge. So that was an issue that we were finding a lot in the communities. Is strategy fit for purpose? And looking to create mechanisms to encourage third sector to participate in local government on a hyper-local level, I'm talking here, not on a bigger level, so in the neighbourhoods, that kind of thing. So initially we set up a project called Data Brew, and these are some of the photos from some of the events that we did. The idea was to bring local government staff and third sector staff together from various backgrounds to take part in informal workshop, having various debates around open data, what kind of language would resonate with that specific group in that specific area, because that is really important. Now, why so hyper-local? Now, I have to go a bit off-piste, but bear with me. And this is important because English people are complicated. So, regional social culture is ingrained in the UK. All the different parts, England, Scotland, Wales, etc. A one-size-fits-all policy doesn't fit, and it would not work, and it bloody definitely does not work. To give you a bit of context, we can't even agree on what to call a bread roll in England. Where I'm from, we call it a cob. You have to say it with the cob, you've got to say the accent. But also we have bars, buns, baps, rolls, and so on, depending on where you live. But it can get more insular than that. We also have hyper-local names like tea cake, muffin, and batch. Why would you call a bread roll a tea cake? Stupid northerners. Everyone's getting angry at home now. On the screen now, you can see some data that's collated from YouGov, which is one of our biggest data collection organisations in the UK. They're government run. But this is where they call it where. So I'm the kind of brown bit in the Midlands. So that's where I'm from. Why is this important? Forget Brexit. If you, excuse my French, really want to piss off English people, this is how you do it. You ask them what they call a bread roll, where they're from, and then contradict them by saying something else. And yes, it's ridiculous, probably borderline pathetic, but I promise you it gets heated. So, for example, I went up to Manchester the other week and I met a lovely couple in a pub. They were from Sheffield, and they were telling me that they call a bread roll a bread cake. And I was like, what are you talking about? It's not a bread cake, it's a cob. And we had an argument, and we fell out, but then we got nice again. It was okay. But, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be magnanimous on the bread issue. because that's what we're famous for in the West Midlands, and say that they're all wrong, it's a cob, and it'll always be a cob, and that's it. So if anyone from the UK is watching this right now, I will promise you they will be screaming at the TV or computer, but bugger them. So if we can fall out so spectacularly about bread and Brexit, for God's sake, imagine if you're a government worker trying to explain open data to a lot of these community groups with that kind of issue. And when I say these community groups, even if they're grassroots NGOs, they're normal people, they're not techie people, they're just normal people. Let's get back to work. Oh. So with these initial Data Brew workshops, we work with various local government institutions across England, and we look to create a soft consensus on how we can potentially include local communities in open data and get them using it for neighbourhood resilience. And again, that issue of neighbourhood resilience, again, which is so important now after COVID. These help community organisations helping citizens with their normal lives. Where am I? So if I'm honest, I approach these from a design point of view, try and figure out where third sector organisations already find data, and if they're unwittingly using open data. I took this approach that could fit the narrative to suggest that, hey, this isn't some kind of alien technology that you're using, it's this simple. So in regards to where they found the data already, I've taken out some of the localised data because that won't really make sense. So it's more general. As a prompt for this, we told them to imagine they are filling out a funding application, as in where would they find information already. So you can see from the pie chart, that's where they found it. So as you can see, the groups were already using open data. There was a smattering of platforms like Google and Wikipedia and news outlets and etc. But third sector staff do seek out local government platforms, with the biggest of the pie came in at the local government, 22.7%, sorry. In joint third, we had the Office for National Statistics, and police data. Google did come in second, but further down the line, we had the NHS. So that told me open data isn't the problem, it's just the way it's presented to these groups that we're talking about in this angle. So I don't want to spend too much time on Data Brew, as we have a lot to get through, and I'm noticing time is ticking away. The most common trend from all these groups was third sector confidence, followed closely by accessibility, and not surprisingly, awareness of open data. Then all this evidence was kind of packed away and sent back to local government. That's when I was approached by the Bertelsmann Stiftung in Germany to see if I would be interested in using that work as a basis to create a downloadable toolkit city governments and landtags across the country can use to create a more community co-designed approach for open data outreach policy. So I'm not talking about open data, outreach policy when it comes to working with these groups. Privacy is a massive issue for Germans, which has had a knock-on effect on transparency activities, and it may be a general distrust for data. For example, if you went to Google Street View, you'll notice that a lot of the country is missing from its road networks. So Google has been pretty diplomatic in this kind of saying that priorities have simply shifted in regards to carry on populating the site. But the delay could be explained by the fact, on the back of a local resident filing legal complaints, that the company's Street View cars violated their privacy rules, that the Berlin State Supreme Court took so long to rule Street View's project legal in the country, Google efforts just floated away. In addition, Street View gave Germans an opt-out that 244,000 households duly signed up for. The result is a lot of blurry buildings, and StreetSide from Microsoft also took the initiative at these places, which is crazy for English people because we're just so, you can have our data, take it, take it. So taking from those different narratives was really interesting. So are Germans dubious about data? You betcha. The digital inclusion agenda in Germany is unique, but it's also an opportunity for community-led digital revolution. If Germany can get this right by taking a community-developed approach to digital, they can set the bar of different smart city pioneering countries, such as South Korea and the USA. I'm going to speak a bit quicker now because I've just noticed time, so I apologise. The prospect of not embracing the digital age is keeping digital leaders in Germany and politicians awake at night. Angela Merkel has said at the CeBIT trade fair a few years ago that citizens are uncertain about the pace of digital change. So on paper, the workshop outreach may work well, a process that educates people that also has that collaborative feel, which is important to facilitate a safe space that local NGOs can come together and with the hosting government institution to have a participation in the process with policy leaders so they can foster those relationships again. So this was all about fostering relationships and learning about open data together. Now, I've put a little bit link there if anyone wants to have a look at it for later purposes. So using this thought process, we created a toolkit called Open Data for All, which you wouldn't surprise in English means open data for all. It's a downloadable toolkit that facilitated will find a guidebook, workshop presentation, a workshop manuscript, so facilitators on different skill levels can run the workshop. Aside from that, we designed tools that help the institution to promote the event, posters, blog, all that kind of stuff. And this was from a lot of conversations with local government across Germany that even though they worked in the ICT departments, that information, that knowledge about open data wasn't there. So they needed something that can kind of handhold them through to like foster those relationships. But what I really wanted to get across with this toolkit was the importance of those local governments keeping dialogue going with the community they are engaged with. I was quite surprised the idea of steering groups is not a big thing in Germany. I don't know if the same thing here, but it was really weird, the idea of them to bring communities on board and have that round-the-table discussion. So what we want to do is kind of help them to like roll out projects quicker and have that kind of that bounce, that kind of narrative with third sector institutions. So it's fit for purpose because if they're setting the agenda, it means the data being pushed out to them, they can actually use that. Moving on, but so this is what we wanted, us and the Stiftung and the Bundestag wanted to kind of push across to local government organisations. So like self-screening, what are you already publishing elsewhere, and could we easily make it available in open format? Third sector screening, what other local government authorities have already published. Here, for example, if you look at different open data portals across Germany, what are they releasing? What do they look like? And stakeholder screening. What does our community want to see in regards to data of interest into different target groups and why? So we did a bunch of events across Germany, like Munster and Mers, and then pandemic. And then so I kind of went away and then did the English version, which you can download there, which is not the German version. But some of those workshops that we actually did, here's was some of the takeout. So government officers struggle to relate to smaller community organisations. So again, policymakers, they're used to the bigger kind of tech-savvy NGOs in their communities, not the small ones in the communities. A lot of senior government officers, we indicated, felt they could not ask questions on open data or request training because it felt that they should already be au fait with it and not risk their reputation. This muddled the narrative in regards to outreach, especially when challenged or questioned in regards to what it means in real terms. Third sector officers felt disconnected, seeking out open data to use with their work, as they felt it did not apply to them due to the language used and how it was portrayed, so their disengaged feeling is not related to them. Very, very briefly, keeping on the virus, we've had everything from conspiracy theories regarding the vaccine, 5G, bioweapons, to even large tech mobiles having the power to control us. But some of the most wary nations about the virus were in Europe, Balkans, Kosovo, and North Macedonia. So working with Open Data Kosovo, Metamorphosis Foundation in North Macedonia, and this is a mouthful, the United States Embassy in Kosovo and the United States Agency for International Development. Over a couple of weeks, we ran 4 events with policymakers, public servants, third sector activists, namely, and it was originally named Open Data versus COVID-19. For a bit of context, now I'm going to run over a bit, is that okay? Oh dear, okay. So, where can I go then? So basically, a lot of the news was saying about how COVID-19 was a hoax over there and in North Macedonia, with similar suspicions reported by the Balkan Investigative Network, stating a damaged social media rumour that 64% of the citizens of North Macedonia who deemed eligible to receive compensation voucher were ethnic Albanians, and only 16% of Macedonians, but ethnic Albanians only make up a quarter of the country's population. So obviously this wasn't true. And I'm going to skip to kind of the stuff that came out of it. Now this was some of the data from the workshops. If you want to take a photo of that, feel free, but I'm not going to read that out because I have to very, very briefly move on. And finally, moving on to the last piece of work I'd like to talk about. This was the next steps of the Often Data for Your work, I guess. But instead of bringing public servants and NGOs together, we wanted to work with policymakers. So very, very, very briefly, I'm going to go off piece. So this was a working with ICT departments, policymakers. A lot of your find is, as you know yourself, because we have a lot of colleagues here, when you're pushing out policy or strategy or community engagement projects, you're not the people or the policymakers or the IT managers running that work, especially with regards to open data outreach. So we wanted to work with these organisations, or government organisation we could see there, in order to create like an elevator pitch, a narrative that they can use to push out across the board. So those third sector organisations in the community wouldn't feel like they're engaging with someone who's just speaking absolute nonsense to them. And those people who were the community developers will feel comfortable talking about it. So this was just basically to ensure the message is cohesive, no deviation, ensuring policy outcomes are met. And this was with a bunch of work from all these governments here, and I'm whizzing through now, sorry about this. So there's a report you can download if you go to new-union.org. All the work, all the stuff, all the feedback from there is you can find. And then, I'm going to get out of the way because I know you're getting angry with me. If I could say one thing from this point I'd like to take with you, just be really aware of the precarious situation grassroots organisations are facing now. It's so important, this community resilience that we've talked about. And if they're going to exist to carry on after this pandemic, they're going to need more support. So I want to go out your way. Thank you very, very much for your time and enjoy the rest of the conference.